Hey guys, what's up? It's Zach. I'm coming to you from my office in Phoenix, Arizona, at home, and I hope everyone out there is doing well and staying safe. I thought I would make you guys a series of drum tuning videos. Occasionally, when I put videos online of us playing live or whatever, I get this question a lot. How do you get your drum sound, or how do you tune your drums, or what's your approach? So I thought I'd talk through what my approach is and how it pertains to me, and show you what exactly it is that I do. When we started making albums in the mid to late 90s, I was still a teenager, and I was kind of, I knew how to play drums, and I knew how to, put the heads on the drums, but I didn't really know much beyond that. Like, if something was sounding weird or wrong, it was hard for me to diagnose how to fix it. And I just hadn't developed a skill yet to figure that out. So we would have to hire in these professional drum techs to come in and tune the drums and make them sound amazing. And that was really cool to hear the drums sound so great, but it was also frustrating for me because I wanted to learn how to do that, right? So I would pick their brain. These different techs that would come through, I'd pick their brain and like, well, what do you do? How do you do it? And the reality of it is it just comes through experience, right? There are some steps we can take to kind of get us in position to find the sound that we like. But it all comes down to sort of training your ear on how to achieve the sound that works for you in your circumstance. Now, when I'm sitting down playing drums, 99% of the time, I'm playing drums in Jimmy Eat World. And that's my primary context. So a lot of my choices, a lot of the things that I gravitate towards in terms of getting my sound are all dictated by my environment, and I want to cut through the loud guitars and the bass, and I want to support the song in some way, and I want my drums to perform in a way that serves the song and makes everything feel right. So I've taken it upon myself to try to learn how to do that as best as I can, and that's what I try to do. So I'm just going to kind of show you what I do, and it may not match up with your circumstances. You might have a different playing style. You might have, you might be in a band that is maybe a jazz band or whatever, a metal band, and it may not fit what you do. So keep that in mind. This works for me. This is certainly not the only way to tune drums. There's lots of ways to skin this cat. This is just my particular way that works for me. The next thing I want to let you guys know about is, in this video, we're going to be starting with the snare drum. And the snare is kind of the center of the kit, and it can color what the kit sounds like, and sort of the heartbeat of the kit, in my opinion. So the drum that I'm going to be tuning in this video is the Q Drum Co. Gentleman Series Aluminum, and I believe it's a 5.5 inch shell depth. 5.5 by 14, and they sent me this drum last summer, and as soon as I started using it, I fell in love with it. It's kind of like, if I were to design a signature drum, this would be it, but unfortunately I'm not enough of a big shot to be able to pull that off, but I'll just claim this is my signature drum. It's very similar to a Ludwig Acrolite, which I've used a lot in our recordings. The middle is a Ludwig Acrolite, Polaris, Dizzy. I mean, so many songs I've used my Ludwig Acrolite on. And the Ludwig Acrolite is a 5-inch depth shell. So with this being a 5.5, it's similar to an Acrolite, but a little bit deeper. And when I saw them making this drum, I knew immediately I would want to try one and check it out. And it's exactly what I thought it would be. It's a little bit more of a more powerful Acrolite, has more body to the drum. You can bring it up in a higher tension and still have more of that sort of the low mids that can cut through. I don't like my snare to be super high pitched and resonant, and I don't like my snare to be really low and thuddy. I like it to have a nice crack, but with a lot of mid-range frequencies in it to kind of make it feel like a punch to the chest, right? And so that's why I'm using this drum, to show you guys how I tune drums. This is what I've been using live ever since I got it. And I know that I'm going to be using this a lot in the studio. I've used it a little bit in our studio in Tempe, and it sounds amazing. So we unfortunately just haven't tracked anything official with it yet, but that day will come for sure. So now we've gone over the snare. The one other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into tuning are these little things called Lug Locks, right? So these are just like these little plastic, they're little pieces of plastic with a circle in the middle. And they're like the rectangle with the circle in the middle. And what you do is you actually put these in your drum on your tension rods like this. You push it down so that the plastic can rest against the rim right there, right? And so what it does is it helps lock your tension rod in one place so it doesn't loosen a lot. Or, you know, what happens is you get your drum tuned really well and you're loving the sound, and then you might be halfway through a show and be like, oh, what happened? My snare dropped and my snare sounds like it's an octave lower. And what can happen is these tension rods can loosen up on you. When you're striking the drum, they loosen, and these Lug Locks kind of help to prevent that. They're not 100%. I think the lugs can still slip a little bit, but like for me, if I don't have these on my snare when I'm playing a live show, it's going to be a bad night because I'm going to be constantly chasing my snare sound and I'm not going to be able to enjoy myself playing. So I would highly recommend getting some of these. They're just called Lug Locks, and I would put them on all the lugs on top and all the lugs on the bottom. If you don't have that many, I would just put the lugs, I'd put them like so when I'm sitting, the label is up here and I'm straddling the drum down here. I'd put them on the lower lugs down here where my stick is hitting the rim, because that's where you're really going to feel most of the vibration on the rim is down here. I'd also put them on the lower rim on the resonant head as well, just to keep those from slipping, because those can also drop. So that's just one thing I failed to mention in the video earlier. So with all of that out of the way, let's get to tuning the snare drum. We're going to start with the bottom head, right? So that's usually whenever I'm tuning, whenever I'm setting up my toms or my snare or even kick drum, I get the bottom head on first and I start there. That's just what I do. Maybe there's other people do different things, but I just feel like getting the bottom head situated and I know that it's in a good spot, that's just like one step out of the way, and then I can totally focus on the top head. Just in terms of kind of getting it into the ballpark, right? So, and that's one other thing I kind of wanted to go over real quick as I get my bottom head out. So I have my resonant head. I use Remo. Ever since I started playing drums, I've used Remo. And so that's just what I'm used to. And whenever I put other brands' heads like on my drums, it sort of feels like a different language to me, and it's kind of confusing. So I stick with just Remo heads, right? So get the head on. There's sort of three phases to, I think, tuning drums. One is the setup. So that's kind of what we're doing now. We're setting up the drum, getting it ready for the second and third steps. And the setup to me is just getting the head on the drum, getting it stretched out. That's something we'll go over. So I like to just get the head on, make sure that everything's lined up. Yeah. And then my first step, what I do is I like to finger tighten the lugs down as tight as I can get it just with my fingers. And that's just my starting point. I'll usually, so my drum keys are right here. I'll usually kind of just use the drum key to get it close to save a little time. I think it's sometimes useful to use two drum keys if you have them laying around. But I kind of get it just barely to the point where, the mic a little bit, barely to the point where they're not quite putting any tension on the rim, which is kind of in a place where I can start to finger tighten it around. And so this is the setup. The setup is getting the heads on, getting them stretched out, and in a good spot. The second stage is what I kind of call the ballpark stage, where you get the bottom head and the top head in the general tension that you want, that you normally like. And some people might be watching and asking themselves, like, well, what is that? What is ballpark? I don't even know. I don't have a ballpark. And that's okay. That's something that you will try to develop. And I'll kind of show you how I get to my ballpark. And then, you can take that for what's worth. So everything's pretty much on. And what I like to do is when you think about the tuning of the drum, right? I like to do, I'll start with the opposite side. So when I'm finger tightening this one, I'm going to finger tighten the corresponding one on the other side of the drum. And I kind of go around like that. It's just a way to kind of keep everything as balanced as possible. I feel like it's a more stable way to bring the tension up on the head, right? So this is basically, everything is tightened as much as I can with my fingers. And to me, this just kind of gives me a good starting point. It's really not about anything other than just a nice starting point to start with, assuming everything's pretty evenly tightened so that I can start using the keys and bringing them up. So because it's, we just put it on, I want to stretch the head out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this tension up quite a lot. So it's going to be pretty tight all the way around, just so I can get this head. You might even hear it start cracking. It's just sort of a way to get the drum ready to be tuned. So so you see I'm here on this side, and now I'm going over here. Then I come back over, and then when I do this head, this lug, this tension rod, then I go to the opposite one. So I just kind of go around like that. And I'm doing basically two turns around. Every time I go around, right? And then I've gone around once, I'm going to go around one more time. Another 2 turns. And then you start to hear that cracking. Go across. And there's a million ways to do this. You can kind of find the ways that you like, but this is the way I do it. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I've gone around twice. It's pretty tight. I'm going to do maybe one turn. Go around one more and do one more turn. Or maybe just like a half a turn. Right? Sometimes it's about feeling the tension in your hands when you are turning the key. A lot of tuning is by feel. You can do it by what you're listening to. But to me, you can kind of feel when one tension rod is tighter than the other just by the feel in your hands. So that's a good way to measure, like, is this tighter than the other one? You can listen, but you can also kind of feel it, right? Okay, so this is up pretty high. So what I'm going to do, what I generally do is I get like a towel, the same towel I use to clean it out, and I sort of try to push it down a little bit. Hopefully the stand holds, but I push down. I try to put a lot of weight on it just to get it nice and stretched out. The more you stretch out the heads before you kind of get into the fine tuning of it, I find as you play, you'll have a more consistent tone. Because ultimately over time, heads like to loosen up. So you'll play and the head will loosen up a little bit. So the more you stretch them out, especially like if you're playing live a show, like get those heads stretched out so that over the course of the show, it'll be pretty. It's kind of like stretching out your guitar strings for any of the guitar players out there. Like you don't want, that tension alleviates and then it goes flat and then you got to bring it back up. And it's the same thing with drums. The tension, these heads, as they get more comfortable on the drum, they sort of let themselves go a little bit and the pitch drops. And if you don't stretch them well, then you'll be chasing that bringing them back up to the tone that you like. So pretty much got it stretched out. I'm just going to kind of go around and listen to. So this is the part where you try to get everything really balanced and even in terms of what you're hearing. So I go around and I try to listen to, like, what are the two or three that are the lowest sounding ones, and then I'm bringing them up. That's kind of what I'm listening to. And even when I tightened this one, I thought it sounded lower. I tightened it, and I even felt the tension being a little less. So I'm going to get this. Okay, so I've gotten the bottom head kind of to a good starting point. It's nice and the tension is nice and tight, which for me, when we're thinking about the different tensions the way you can tune a snare, I always like to bring my bottom head up really tight. To me, that gives the drum kind of this energetic sound that I prefer. So usually if I'm sitting down at a kit and I haven't played the snare in a while or just sat, like that's almost one of the first things I do when I hit it. I notice, oh, the bottom head probably needs to be brought up a little bit. And when you bring up the bottom head a little bit from where you have it normally, it kind of just gives that drum, like it just sounds like you're freshening up the drum a little bit and getting it going again. You're bringing it back to life. So that's usually my move. If someone says my snare drum doesn't sound very good, without even like knowing or hearing it, I said just try to bring up the bottom head a little bit and see what happens. And sometimes, a lot of times it helps a lot. Okay, so I got the bottom head on the snare of the new head, and now I just put on the snare wires. So we'll deal with that. We'll deal with we'll talk about the tension of the snare wires later. But we got a nice tight bottom head on there. I'm gonna flip it over, and I'm gonna get the new top head out. So I use, for both live and in studio, I use the Remo Emperor X. I believe Mike Fasano designed this particular head, and it's awesome. What I love about it is it's durable, so it'll last me several shows, and it sounds great in the studio. It sounds great live, and I never have to like order different heads for the studio. I just order a bunch of these and hold on to them, and it's a double ply head, and it's a pretty thick snare head. I like it because it's durable and it gives the drum the tone that I like. If you listen to sort of the way I like to tune my snare, is I like the drum. I don't like the drum to be too high pitched, and I don't like it to be super super thuddy. I like it to be kind of in the middle, and I want it to feel bright, but also I want to have a lot of those like low mid frequencies coming through, and I feel like this head does that in a way that I really appreciate and I really like. So we're gonna get the head on there. Gonna get the top rim back on here. Line everything up. And again, same thing with the bottom head. I'll get everything into a place where I've finger tightened the snare, the tension rods, all the way around to get my starting point. So here's my keys. So again, just gonna kind of get these close enough to where I can finger tighten them. And the keys can help me kind of save time. If you want to use, like, I think, every once in a while, if I have it charged or whatever, I have like a drill. You can get a drill bit with a drum key on it. Makes life a little easier. I typically do just the drum keys because they're usually around and I don't have to charge a drum key. Okay, so it's ready to finger tighten. Gonna bring these down again. I'm doing each lug from the opposite end together and bringing it down just to save some time. Going as tight as I can. Going around there. Okay, again, it's finger tightened, so I feel like I'm at a good starting point with with starting to bring up the head. And again, we're going to stretch the top head as well. So I'm going to do 2 turns, go across, 2 turns. So I'll grab my towel, and push down a little bit, get it nice and stretched out. Some people like to stand on them. I don't like to do that. I don't think that's necessary. But I think you can if you want, but just get a nice shove. Right now I brought up the snare head. It's pretty tight. It's a lot tighter than than the final position is going to be. But just to give you a sense of like, so I'm going to try to get it balanced. So this is the tricky part that I can't really relay on a video. I'm going around and I'm hitting the different, the head at where the tension rods are, right? So I have 8 tension rods. I'm going next to them and I'm hitting them like this. And I'm kind of just getting a feel for, the tone of each tension rod and trying to get them as balanced as possible. And this is a skill to learn that just takes a little bit of time, right? Right now, because we're doing the kind of, getting things in a ballpark here, we don't have to be too crazy about it, but we just want to get everything even. But this is something that you'll just kind of learn over time. Another thing I could suggest too, though, is it sometimes helps get just like your index finger and put a little pressure right in the middle of the drum. And then when you go around, it helps kind of kill the tone, the overtones, and it helps you zero in on the sound of each tension rod. So you hear that one is a little bit higher than this one. So I'm going to bring this one up a little bit, just a hair. That one's a little lower. Tighter than all the other ones. Okay, so I think it's kind of in a pretty good ballpark. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip it back around and just double check that bottom head. Make sure that it's as tight as I want it to get. And so I like to sometimes you have this loose end, you put a stick under here, and then you can listen to. I'm going to bring this up a hair. I think this needs to come up even more. Like, I'm really not shy about getting it really tight. Okay. Let's just say that's it. That's good. So the next thing I want to talk about is your snare wires on the bottom. Those are a really critical, important part of your drum sound. And I think a lot of times people tend to tighten these way too tight. And I think sometimes when you have the snare wires on the bottom too tight, it sort of can give you that crisp sound, which is cool. But I feel like the downside of it is it starts to choke the drum. Like, this bottom head is a big ingredient to your sound. So you don't want this bottom head to be super choked with these tight snare wires going across. So the thing I like to do is I like to get these as loose as I can without them sounding overly rattly, like where the rattle is a distraction, right? I want these to sound, I want these to really move and breathe, so that the drum has that kind of, I don't know, like a spread to it that I like. So right now, I'll try just to hit the drum and see where we're at. Okay, so these are a little tight still, so I'm going to loosen it up a little bit. So right now, after stretching out the top head, it's a lot tighter than I would normally have it when I'm playing on it, right? So It's been stretched. I'm going to start now bringing this down a little bit around the same way we brought it up. I'm going to start bringing it down a little bit. So I'm going to go like 2 turns down on each one. So I brought it down. I'm really not liking what I'm hearing, right? It sounds a little strange to me. So what I'm going to do is, let me see here. There's a little bit of an overtone. So we got to try and chase that out, and the snare wires are still a little too tight. Which is okay, we'll figure that out. So I'm going to throw the snares off. So that's one of the things. It's easier to tune the drum and to listen to the tone at each tension rod when your snares are off. So you might want to have them off when you're going around and trying to tune, right? So let's see here. I'm going to bring the bottom head up even more. That's sort of something that I'm hearing that I want to do. So I'm going to turn this around. I want to bring this sucker up even more. Just a hair, just like a little nudge turn on every lug. Okay. Now, get this back on. So now you're starting to really hear those lower tones. And I'm getting it into, this is sort of like the fine tuning stage, I would say. The first stage is like set up, then kind of get both heads in the ballpark, and now we're really starting to fine tune the drum before we do any muffling. So I'm going to put the I'm starting to kind of fine tune it. It sounds still a little wonky, but we're going through it. We're going to try and get these. And, just remember, little tiny adjustments can go a long way, especially at this stage when we feel like, okay, the top head is sort of at the tension I normally like it. The bottom head is kind of at the tension that I normally like it. So I'm in the ballpark here. So these little, when you're fine tuning, the little adjustments go a long way. So you don't need to be like cranking one lug up a lot. Just do little tiny, like sometimes it can just be like that much, can make a big difference. Can make a huge difference, right? So. To me, one of the things that I do when I play my snare is I do a lot of rim shotting. And for the most part, when I'm trying to really hit my really big 2/4 rock grooves, I'm almost always hitting a rim shot, right? So I'm trying to hit the head and the rim at the same time. And to me, it kind of triggers the drum in a way that you don't get when you just hit it, without the rim. Like that kind of high-end attack that you get by using the rim on a strike. So to me, I feel like this is in a pretty good spot for how it sounds and how I like it to sound. So I feel like it's in a pretty good spot. It's really hard for me to tell in my office though, but this is just what I do. So a lot of people have been asking me about muffling and what do you use to muffle your drums and how do you place the muffling? Um, it totally depends on the kind of room you're in, what your circumstances are, what kind of music you're playing. But for me and for what I do, I have kind of like a standard thing a way of muffling the drums. And I always use gaff tape. I know that there's a lot of really great products out there, like Big Fat Snare Drum or, uh, you know, nice things to use that are a little bit more fancier or maybe even in some ways more effective. To me, I've always just done it this way. And the other thing, the other reason why I do it this way is um, I like the way I can get it to sound. I like the fact that there's always black gaff around. So if you left your other, your moon gels or whatever in your other stick bag and you don't have any, you can always ask someone, hey, do you have a roll of gaff? And it's always available. So this is what I use all the time. And I'll tell you what I do. So I like to do I get maybe about like 6 inches of black gaff and I'll rip it. And then I kind of maybe 3/4 of an inch or about 3/4 of an inch, I fold it down like that. And I just start making a little bit of a roll. And I'm trying to kind of keep it at like a rectangle as I go down, right? So I don't really want to I don't want to roll it up like a circle. I kind of want to have it to look like this, right? So it's just like this, if you ever see any videos of me playing in the studio or live, you'll see a handful of these on my snare. So this is like my little moon gel that I use. So what I normally do is I like to start out with putting this on the label of the head. So whatever label you have, I put it right here, right above the Remo. I set it down, I push it down really good, and it, ends up looking like that, right? Okay. So I will do 3 of those. I start off with 3, and I kind of do it in a way that's balanced around the head. So instead of doing just all the moon gel on one side or the other side, I start with kind of a balanced set of 3 that are placed evenly around the head. And the thing is that's just sort of like my starting point. It's just what I normally just do to save time. So I'll put this guy right here. And there's really no rhyme or reason to, if you when you're muffling your drums, sometimes you can just take, let's say I just put one of these on here. If I just put my first one, that was it. I was all I was using. And for a lot of people, that's perfectly enough muffling, right? Sometimes just moving that one piece around on different spots on the head can give you pretty drastic results. Your snare can go from sounding really odd, and if you just if you kind of try to move it around and find a place where it works. So there's really not, this is what I do to start out with, but there's really not a go-to must spot that I always go to. It just depends. So basically it will look, almost all of my snares when I start out will look like this. 1 on top, 2 over here, and they're basically evenly distributed around the head, right? So not just one side has muffling, the other doesn't. And that's how I start off, right? So and for me, because I never play a show or record a song in the studio without any muffling on the snare, hardly ever. I'm always using some kind of muffling. So for me, this is where I really get down to the fine tuning. Yes, I think you should try to get your drum to a place where it sounds good without muffling. Obviously, you don't want the muffling to just be hiding a crappy sounding drum. But for me, this is where like I don't really actually start hearing the final result until I get the muffling on it. So let's see here. This is on. So it sounds pretty solid. Like it's not amazing. I'm gonna lessen the tension of the snare wires a little bit. It's just really hard for me to tell in here too, in a room like this. So I'm going to go around and just listen to. So there's if you heard, there's kind of like a little bit of like a ring. These two guys are a little bit lower, and so I brought them up. And you know, that's just something that like you start to develop. You know, as you get more used to tuning drums, you'll develop this sort of instincts. But you know, you'll get used to what you're normally used to hearing, and you'll be able to sit down, you hit the drum, and you'll start to be able to diagnose what's wrong and take a guess. So, okay, I think the bottom head's either too low or too high, or the top head is unevenly tuned, and you'll start to, you know, be able to just hear it and figure it out. And that's really, I think, an important tool for drummers to learn is how to tune their drums and how to be competent in any scenario to help make their drum kits sound good. Because, you know, it's really important, I think. I mean, if there's two drummers trying to get the same gig, and I'm hiring them, and one can tune their drums and make their kit sound good, and one doesn't really know how to do that, I'm gonna pick the dude who knows how to tune every time, because you know it's pretty critical. Like if you're playing in a band and your bandmates don't ever have to worry about, you know what, the drums are gonna sound slamming tonight. You know, they don't have to worry about that. They know that that's going to be the case. So, you know, that's just would be my advice to all the drummers, is to learn how to do this stuff and take an interest in it and try to become a little bit of a drum nerd when it comes to how they sound and head choice and try different things. I've had the benefit of having decades of experience and just sort of learning through making mistakes. And so this is just something that I would encourage you to work at, right? So right now I had a little bit of a weird frequency honk to it, and by bringing up these two, I'm eliminating those. I mean, that's basically good for me. I would be able to take this drum and start sound check and see how it feels in the songs and hear how hear how it sounds on my monitor in context with everything else. But that's basically what I do. Depending on the scenario in the studio, you might want to take off muffling, you might want to add muffling, depending on the style of song. But that's basically my approach. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.